I was born in the beautiful country of South Africa. We are known for our diverse culture, our beautiful landscape, our exquisite wildlife. We are also known for our deeply oppressive past. In 1991, I was born to my mixed-race mother, who was 24, and my incredibly handsome African father, who was 25 at the time. I did not know that I would only spend 9 months with my father, because shortly after I was born, my father was brutally murdered by an apartheid assassin by the name of Eugene De Kock. By the time I was 9 years old, I knew what Eugene looked like, and my mom had bought a book called Into the Heart of Darkness by Jack Poe. On the cover of the book was a picture of Eugene, and inside, I could never ever tell because my mom would never reveal it to me. However, every time we had guests, she'd ask me to go get this book. And so I'd take the book to her, and whenever I'd leave the room, I'd hear people crying or screaming. So one day I wanted to know what was in this book and what page it was on. So I sat outside the door and I eavesdropped, and I knew it was a picture of my dad. So one day when I had the opportunity, I ran to my mom's room and I grabbed this book. I sat at the edge of the bed and I opened, and in the book was a picture of my dad's burnt body, clutching a steering wheel and his eyes protruding. I quickly shut the book and threw it to the back of the cupboard, my eyes tearing and my body shaking. I knew I couldn't tell my mom because I would get in trouble. But as the years went by, I became increasingly resentful and depressed. But I would gather information about Eugene to find out who this man was. I would read articles such as he was prime evil, he was the assassin of the state, and he had been sentenced to 212 years in prison on 89 charges. Yet, this did not feel good to me. I still felt angry. By the time I'd gotten to 16, I was so suicidal and I'd engaged with death so many times. However, one evening, as I went to bed, I felt a severe pain in my chest. I rushed to my mom's room and I said, "I think I'm having a heart attack." She quickly took me to the hospital, where they kept me overnight for observation. The next day, the doctor asked to see my mother and I. And he said to us, "In my over 20 years of experience, I've never seen stress symptoms so severe in someone your age." He followed with the words, "Your body is killing you." For days after, those words echoed in my mind. And for a long time, I felt okay with it. However, one day a thought crossed my mind. And that thought was, Eugene killed your father, and now you're going to let him kill you. Out of sheer anger and frustration, I decided to try and live. I looked for moments of joy and inspiration. And by the time I got to 24, I thought I was doing it quite successfully. Until one day, I got home, and my mother said, "I got a call from the National Prosecuting Authorities, and they want to know if we'd like to go meet Eugene." Those words struck me so deeply. I immediately said yes. However, as the days went by, we had many dinner table discussions and trepidation. However, when the day came, we all went to Kgosimampura prison in Pretoria. I was expecting to walk through these steel bars and this cold place. However, we were led to where the staff eats their dinner. It almost felt eerie because walking in, I felt like I was visiting an old relative. It was antique furniture. It was a long dining room table. There was tea, scones, and biscuits waiting for us. And as we situated ourselves by the dining room table, my mom sat at the furthest end, and then it was the rest of my family, and then I was on the other end. There was the priest, an empty chair which Eugene would occupy, and the rest of the MPA members filled the table. We were told that Eugene would walk in at any minute and the meeting would start. So we continued our chit-chat amongst ourselves. I turned around first, and as though by magic, Eugene had appeared. I looked at him, and the priest saw the look in my eyes, and he said, "Oh, let me introduce you. Eugene has arrived." And he started with my mother, and he said, "That is Sandra Mama, widow of the deceased Glenak Masilo Mama." And Eugene leaned forward and said, "Pleasure to meet you." And he leaned back. And with each and every one of us, he did the same thing. The priest asked what we'd like to ask, and my mom began the conversation. She said, "I want to know what happened to my husband." Eugene told us that he had sent an Askari into my father's camp, and that the Askari was feeding them information, and my father was one of the people that was seen as radical and someone who could actually implement a lot of problems for Eugene. And so Eugene decided that he was going to set up an ambush, him and his team. And my father was told that he would just need to transport 3 other gentlemen from the party into Nelspruit and he would head back home. So my father, of course, agreed. And when my father was driving into Nelspruit, Eugene De Kock and his team were waiting for him. As my father approached the Nelspruit Bridge, Eugene's team started firing at the vehicle. When Eugene realized that my father's vehicle wasn't coming to a stop, he ran down the Nelspruit Bridge and he emptied out his magazine cartridge on my father. When he still saw signs of life in the vehicle, he doused them all in fuel and he set them alight. After Eugene retold the story, my breath was taken away. My mom continued and she said, "But why, Eugene? Why my husband?" And he looked at us and he said, "For no reason." It felt like someone had kicked me in the stomach. My father died that day for no reason. As the conversation continued, I couldn't say much. I didn't have much to say, to be honest. And then it returned back to my mother. And she said, "I forgive you, Eugene." And so my grandfather said it, and my brother said it, and then it got to me. And I said, "You know, Eugene, I want to say I forgive you. But before I do, I want to know one thing." And he looked at me and he said, "Anything? What's that?" And I said, "Do you forgive yourself?" He looked away and he looked around. And he looked back at me and he said, "Every time a family comes here, that's one question I hope they never ask me." He looked away again and he dabbed the side of his eye and he said, "When you've done the things I've done, how do you forgive yourself?" I began to sob and sob and sob in that moment. And what I realized was I wasn't even sobbing for myself. I saw a human being in front of me. And I realized we were both victims in that moment, and he could never take away my pain, nor could I ever take away his. I followed by saying, "I forgive you, Eugene." The priest dismissed the meeting, and I stood up first. And I walked up to Eugene, and I said, "Eugene, would you mind if I gave you a hug?" He looked at me a little shocked, and he stood up, and he held me tightly, and he said, "I'm so sorry for what I've done, and your father would have been so proud of the woman you've become." We went our separate ways, and I advocated for Eugene's parole, which he later got. And people would come up to me and they'd say, "You released a prisoner that day." And I would smile and I'd say, "No, I released 2 prisoners that day. One was Eugene and the other was me." What I'd come to realize in that crucial encounter in my life was that Eugene had control over 16 years of my life. And I didn't even realize it. And so when someone hurts us, yes, they hurt us once, but when we hold on to that story and that narrative, it's like they hurt us again and again and again. And therefore, they have power over our lives. We do not. And so when I forgave Eugene that day, I truly set myself free. I was no longer Candice, the victim to Eugene De Kock. I was Candice, the victor. I was Candice, the survivor. And I was Candice, the person who could do anything because I had control over my life. Do you have control over yours? Thank you.